Top-heavy stock indexes are nothing to fear. This is why the financial media, there's some great writers and there's a ton of bad ones in this business. It's just as embarrassing. This is an embarrassingly simplistic article. I'm embarrassed that people who write this stuff are getting paid millions of dollars to manage people's money. It's embarrassing to me. This will exemplify a straw man argument. So let's read this. This is freaking nuts. This is by Barry Ritholtz. I think it's in Bloomberg. Here's a prominent writer in our financial business. And wait till I read this. You're just going to sit there and so I'm going to read it and then I'll give you my criticism of why this argument it's dumb and why it's such a straw man. I don't understand. I don't know. I don't know what other businesses have, but when I read stuff like this, I'm like, this is why we try so hard to look like we are a hard science, the science behind investing, evidence-based investing. It's because stuff like this is trite. All right, so this is Dateline 8/19/2020. Top heavy stock indexes are nothing to fear. None of the criticism levied over the years against indexing has undercut the primary advantage of passive investing. It's cheap, simple, and avoids the futility of stock picking. Still, you have to give the opponents credit for persistence. They keep trying to convince investors that it's a poor approach to asset management. Okay, I agree with that. I calculated last year that more than $80 trillion in equities worldwide was actively managed, which shows why active managers want to protect their franchise. That doesn't make any sense. All right, I calculated last year that $80 trillion in equities was actively managed, which shows why active managers want to protect their franchise from further erosion. Since the 2008-9 crisis, we'll just say $2 trillion has moved out of active funds and into passive. This makes an incredible chart on capital flows. That absolutely doesn't make any sense at all. So for the last, basically, we're going on 15 years now, 2 trillion out of 80 trillion have, all right, well, that's weird. That's idiotic. All right, anyway, even so, the criticisms are worth considering, if only to sharpen one's thinking. In particular, the claim that indexing is dangerous because it represents a highly concentrated stock risk. And many major indices that are weighted by market capitalization, such as the S&P 500, the 6 high-flying FANG, and we'll talk about Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, and Google. They only recently added Microsoft. It's weird. Now we can throw out Netflix because it's not part of the S&P 500 top 10. We'll get into that in just a second. Anyway, the 6 high-flying stocks have gained disproportionate influence. A recent Market Watch column asks, how much of your retirement savings are you now gambling on the fortunes of just 6 companies? If you're holding them in an S&P 500 market index fund, the answer is about a quarter. So basically what they're saying is 6 of those companies represent 25% of the S&P 500, where 6 of the 500 companies in the S&P 500 represent 25%. So Ritholtz reached out to Howard Silverblatt, senior index analyst for S&P Dow Jones, for more color. So look, do you see what's happening here? So he's bashing the active advisors, active managers, which I bash more than anyone else, other than John Bogle. He's saying how bad they are. So I'm going to reach out to Howard Silverblatt, who's part of the S&P 500 portfolio advisors. Who represents the index. And we're going to say, hey, I'm hearing this is some of the negative stuff on indexing. Tell us why that's wrong. All right, so that's one. I probably won't be able to hold my tongue to tell you what else is wrong with this, but I'm going to try to. So I'm going to go over it here because this is what they're saying about why you are so bad. So why are you? So let me give you the ability to rebut why that's silliness. All right. So Silverblatt noted that the 10 largest stocks in the S&P 500 accounted for 27.6% of the capitalization. That makes the benchmark the most top-heavy index since the 1960s, according to Silverblatt. All right, the most 10 largest stocks in the S&P 500 represent 27.6. That may seem concerning, but history shows it isn't. Year-end data shared going back 40 years showed the highest concentration of the top 10 stocks ranging from a low of 17.5 in 2014 to a high of 25.5 in 1980. That puts the current weighting a little above average. The concentration to begin the 1980s did not prevent the market from seeing substantial gains, though. The recovery from the 70s bear market and the double-dip recession that began during the 80s eventually gave way to increased breadth and greater market participation. In other words, as the economy helped small and mid-sized firms, the top-heavy index concentration decreased. All right, so I want you to try to analyze. We're already hitting the freaking straw man argument. It's already happened. It has nothing to do with index versus active. Nothing. The straw man. I want to pause for just a second and think. What is the argument? What is his argument, and how is he dodging it? All right, because it's critical. And when I point out for you, like, oh, the bigger point is that it's not rare for a small group of stocks to account for a large percentage of the S&P 500. What is important is the relative performance of those 10 stocks to the other 490. The ratio fluctuates based on which group is outperforming, resulting in continuous battle between mega stocks and the merely large and mid-sized stocks. Considering just one of the many variables affecting this relationship. For example, when overseas economies are soft, larger international companies may be less appealing to investors. Alternatively, a robust global economy expansion does the opposite. Now, the relationship between mega cap stocks and all the others has been relatively tight, about 8% between the 1980 high concentration in the of 25.5% and the low of 17.5% in 2014. Credit the tendency for a rising economic tide to lift all boats, okay? What makes 2020 so unique is the externality of the pandemic and societal-wide lockdown. The economic impact hasn't been evenly distributed. Large international tech companies, essentially remote office work and people stuck in their houses, have thrived. Add to that how much better the world has managed its response to the pandemic versus the U.S. bungled response. I don't agree with that at all because Ritholtz hates Trump. The other guy on his team, Josh Brown, hates Trump. They hate Trump, man. One would be hard-pressed to find another era where circumstances led these two groups of companies to diverge as much as they have. All right. Consider another example of non-economic externality parallel to the current economy virus. The earthquake and tsunami that damaged the Fukushima nuclear reactors. Japan's Nikkei fell 17.5% in the 3 trading days after the disaster, but the decline wasn't evenly distributed. Sectors such as basic apparel were impacted very differently than those that suffered structural damage. Okay, but even that enormous event is nothing compared with a global pandemic. The economic impact of the worldwide lockdown and reopening has created a winner-take-all. Okay, eventually an effective vaccine will be created that can treat COVID-19. Really? When that happens, will the lockdown advantage of the giant tech companies and their shares reallocate back to other companies, or did the externality create a permanent advantage to the clever mammals, which can use circumstance or whatever? Regardless, neither mean reversion nor paradigm shift means the index funds represent a concentrated risk. They will go up and go down as the market. See, it's just freaking idiotic. All right, so I'm just going to share with you. This is an idiotic argument because let's see what the initial argument was. All right, so the initial argument, ready? How much of your retirement savings are you now gambling on the fortunes of just 6 companies? If you're holding them in the S&P 500, about a quarter. So the argument isn't about the top 10, fool. The argument is about the top 5, really is what it is. And let me show you what the top 5 are. We're going to go back to Vanguard S&P 500, date July 31st, 2020. The top 5, not even the top 6, because Netflix isn't in the top 5. The top 5. So here's the top 10 holdings. 28.7, according to Vanguard, in the 31 July. All right, so you can say, look, that's high because the highest 27.6, 28.7. So it's gone up a full percentage point, and the highest was in 1980 at 25.5. That's not the freaking argument. The argument is the top 5. So of the 28% top 10 holdings, the top 5 represent, that's 12, 17, 20, 23%. So while the top 10 represent 28.7% of that top 10, the top 5 represent about a quarter of it. Now it's probably a quarter. So 5 companies, all in the same sector, represent a quarter of the S&P 500. Johnson & Johnson's 1.4, Berkshire Hathaway 1.4, Procter & Gamble, Visa, and JP Morgan. That is not the same as Apple with a 7% roughly. So basically, Apple represents 7 times what JP Morgan does. So the top 10, the list is still significant. So to say the top 10 has been top heavy like this before in 1980, and that showed great run in the S&P 500, it's not the flipping argument. The argument is simple, the top 5. Well, the actual argument is the top 6. This is a complete straw man. We're not arguing that Johnson & Johnson, Berkshire Hathaway, Procter & Gamble, Visa, JP Morgan represent between them 6%. We are arguing that the other 5 represent between them 25%. It's just, it's such a straw man. But I'm not even sure the dude knows it's a straw man. I'm not sure the guy's that smart. I really don't believe that because let me show you what comment I wrote. So I show you a comment. I got to read this. Again, this is on Advisor Perspectives via Bloomberg, so he's not reading it. Wow, complete straw man argument. Barry writes, acknowledging the concern about the top heaviness of the top 6 holdings, but then goes on to write solely about the historical top 10 influence. And I talk about just like it did. As of July, the top 10 represented 28.7% of the S&P 500. The top 5 were 23%, and it's only become larger now. Netflix isn't in the top 10. Pretty significant difference between arguing the weighting of the top 10 versus the top 5 tech stocks. Our financial media is infantile in its ability to see argument. They just have no ability to freaking just reason. Their critical thinking is corrupt. It's not there. This is why I love Nassim Nicholas Taleb, because he doesn't pull punches on the economics profession, on the scientism that we've fallen for. Just these guys. And the whole thing, too, is that this shows you that active management is bad. The whole thing is just nuts. And I'm sick of this crap. I'm sick of these holier-than-thou people. And let me tell you something else, by the way. I'm sick of these holier-than-thou people saying anyone who argues is arguing in favor of active management. That is farthest thing you could say. Just because you're sitting there saying the S&P 500 is top-heavy, which unequivocally it is, it's more top-heavy than it's ever been if we want to use a 10%, the top 10. I'm not even using that. The top 5. Just because you can make an argument against that does not mean you're in favor of active management. That's just silly. The argument would be the indexing still works, but the indexing on value stocks looks like a better opportunity because the top 5 represent 25% of the S&P 500, and the top 5 all fall in this one category. And when this guy he blows over, he goes, well, maybe index will go up and go down with the market. Well, if you just retired, you can't have an index go down. Well, you can. We'd want you to avoid the index going down like it happened in 2000, 2001, and 2002 because the S&P 500, again, was top-heavy. Not to the same extent it is now. An effective vaccine will be created? What the hell is that? I don't care about the Nikkei. But he says it's a winner-take-all with a handful of companies capturing nearly all the economic gains. So what happens when the winner-take-all goes against it? Were these people not around in 2000? This is why there's a guy who had written. I remember when I said I want what's the validation that the vaccines that you take for infants are safe, and they had a study from the IOM, the Institute of Medicine, since changed their name to something else back in 2012 or something like that. And they did the exact same thing, the straw man here. They said, while we acknowledge the risk of the people who are worried about the combined effect of the vaccines, the evidence shows there's not a worry. But then they actually do not show that. They show something completely different. I read that. I said, that's actually not the argument. You are stating the argument, but then you're not using the argument. You're stating it, and then you're straw manning it is what you're doing. You're using a different argument to tear down this argument. I could not believe it. That's where I knew. I said, man, this is evil stuff, these guys. And Riddles is just not that bright. I could tell that a mile away. And Josh Brown, just not that bright. I know that sounds like a bash. These guys don't care. I just don't care. The industry is full of people who just aren't that bright. They're not good critical thinkers. I don't know why we attract so many people like that, but we do have some bright guys in the business. We do. My man Wade Pfau, bright guy. Does that mean everything he writes is great? No, it doesn't. Blanchett, bright guy. We got Finke. We got Larry Kotlikoff. Lots of bright guys in this business. It's the the folks, specific investment money managers that just aren't the most critical thinking, not bright. Now, again, are there some? Sure. But if you're writing in mainstream media, we know you're not that bright. Mainstream media, sports, and financial media, you're just, I'm sorry, but they're just not that many bright people if you're writing this stuff. And it's sad because unfortunately, a lot of people read this and they think, oh, that makes sense. All right. Love to hear your comments. We'll see you.